Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, president of Dale Carnegie Tokyo Training. My special guest today is an old friend of mine, Jonathan Epstein, who is the country manager for Adyen in Japan. Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you very much.
So we're going to talk about leadership, but how is it that you're in Japan and how is it that you've been running organizations here? Give us a little bit of the backstory, please.
It started when I graduated from college.
Okay.
Yeah, I graduated way back in 1988, studying philosophy. And I learned in studying philosophy that there are basically, the way that philosophers see the world is sort of, there's truth and false, right?
Mm-hmm.
Black, white, 1, 0. Right? But I heard that in Japan, that doesn't work. That basically people can say yes.
How do people hear that about Japan when they're in America?
Well, but people would say, they talk about Japanese words and they say, so what's the word for yes? And then somebody would say, hai, right? And then they say, yeah, but that doesn't mean yes.
Yeah, okay.
And they said, there's no word for yes in Japanese.
So 88, that would be about the bubble in Japan.
It was the bubble, that's right.
So Japan was on everyone's minds and could take over Japan and the imperial palace is worth more than the entire state of California and
right.
all that sort of stuff, right? That was the era.
That was the era, exactly. So I came over really to find out if it was true that there was no true and false, no yes or no in Japan. And I'm still working to figure that out. So I did my first year teaching English out in the countryside in
Were you a jet or something like that?
Yes, on the jet program.
You were a jet on the jet program. Wow. Yep. You'd be the most successful jet ever.
I don't know about that.
Yeah.
And then worked for a member of the parliament for a year.
Right.
So
how do you go from being a jet out in the boonies to be in the parliament, in the Diet, working for a Japanese politician? How did that happen?
Well, I knew that I didn't want to continue teaching English and that I wanted to do something different. And I took a vacation to Thailand one year, and I was sitting in the plane next to a middle-aged man who was a professor at a Japanese university and said, I'm interested in working in business or politics. He said, well, why not politics? Why not work for a Japanese politician? I thought, yeah, that would be fun. And so he introduced me to a friend of his who introduced me to two different members of parliament, and I picked one.
This would be LDP politicians, I presume,
yes.
right? So the ruling party.
Yeah.
Well, been ruling for most of the time in the post-war period.
That's
so,
right.
Okay, right.
That's right.
And that must have been fascinating. I mean, what on earth? Did you speak Japanese by that stage?
I did. I spoke a little.
A little,
it was,
right?
Yeah. I was not perfect, but enough to get by. It was the time of the Northridge earthquake in California. And so I joined a bunch of Japanese politicians on the streets of Ginza, asking for money for earthquake victims.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was quite a scene, and various other crazy things.
And then how did you bridge out of that into business?
So, I figured that my prospects as a Japanese politician were pretty limited. So moved back to...
I think you have to be a Japanese citizen to
yes,
become a politician.
that's a good start.
Unless you're going to change your nationality, that's probably a bit of an obstacle.
It was a Kerr limiter, yeah. So moved back to the U.S. And started to look around, and so worked for Procter & Gamble for a couple of years, and then went to business school. And then from there, came back to Japan.
Where did you go to business school?
To Harvard.
Harvard. So that's an elite gold course right there. That's always a good start for the future of your career.
It was trial by fire.
I'll bet it was. So people have told me that they sort of contrast Stanford and Harvard, that Harvard is very competitive. And Stanford, they say, is more collaborative in terms of how the business schools operate. I don't know if that's true or not, but certainly they tell me Harvard very competitive. So it would be trial by fire, I imagine. Well,
it's competitive, but it's not just competitive academically. It's competitive sort of socially and a number of different ways. So it's an adjustment in a number of different ways. Yeah.
And so you graduated from business school, and then
and then came back to Japan.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
And you had something lined up? Was it Procter and Gamble? Or
Yes. No. I went back and forth a few times, but ended up working with SoftBank.
Oh, okay.
And so first with the venture capital group
Right.
at SoftBank, and then working directly with Masayoshi Son.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That must be. This is probably before they exploded too, I suppose. They'd probably bought Yahoo or into Yahoo by that stage, but he hadn't sort of gone the full SoftBank takes over the world part yet.
Well, we had plans at the time.
Plans, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I still got them from what I can see. Right?
Exactly.
I wasn't giving up on that.
But Yahoo was a big part of it. And that was the time that we did the original investment. It was $20 million at the time, I think, into Alibaba.
Right.
So we met Jack.
One of the great investments of all time, right?
Yes.
What was the return on Alibaba? It was 20 million in, and how much did he take out?
50 billion?
50 billion.
Something like that. I don't know. A lot.
You didn't throw a couple of bucks in there yourself, did you?
You know?
Whoops.
Well, oops.
Wish I had.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so when you were in SoftBank, were you an operator yourself and you're sort of doing research on investments and due diligence, or are you running a team by that stage?
So I was not running a team. We were in the what's called the shachoshitsu, the president's office. Right. And so basically, I spent most of the time traveling with Son on deals and being just an extra eyes and ears. When we were in meetings with potential investees, I would help sort of convince them why SoftBank would be a good partner and why they should give us a good deal. But generally, what I did is took the first after the sort of the shake hands when we created a joint venture in Japan, I would take that relationship until the stage that there was a CEO for the company in Japan, right? So we'd help find the CEO and then structure the business and work with a management team, generally in the US, but sometimes, in different parts of the world.
So my impression, I've never met Son, but my impression is he must be a tremendous salesman. So why did he need you to soften him up for the sale? I thought he'd be the guy, Mr. Charisma or something like that.
His charisma is incrable.
Is it?
It's amazing, and I've learned. I should have learned more, but I learned. I learned a lot from just that, the various approaches and techniques with people. But I think he likes to have a group of people around him who he can, toss ideas around with, and also in meetings with entrepreneurs to basically give them a different perspective and a more familiar perspective on how a deal would look.
Okay.
Right. And so since I had some of that background from the US and from business school, that was, I think, a very easy way for them to see how they could make something work.
You were taking the benefit and you were drawing out the application of the benefit for them so they could see in actuality this is how it would look. So I get that. And so at what point in time did you start running a team of your own in Japan? Was it with SoftBank or after you left SoftBank?
It was after I left SoftBank. Initially, right. Well, it was sort of part of with SoftBank. One of the deals that we worked on together was the creation of NASDAQ Japan.
Right.
And so as a part of that, I became the CFO for NASDAQ Japan and had a team there.
So what was that like? I mean, here you are, you're a Harvard grad, you've been a jet and you've been in Procter and Gamble, which has got, a particular way of doing things, and been in politics. So you had a very sort of eclectic background. And so now you're actually running a team of people. I presume the people in the team are mainly Japanese or a mixed group, or how is that?
No, it was all Japanese.
Japanese. So
yeah.
When you come out of business school and you go, right, this is how things work, organizational dynamics and blah, blah, blah. Then you get in the real world, particularly in Japan. So were there any things, particularly when you started leading the team, that were challenging for you, or things you felt, this is very familiar, or this is quite, quite strange, or hard, or how was that first reaction for you?
I mean, for me, it was all challenge.
Was it?
I had no sort of experience really in finance.
What was particularly challenging about running a team? Because you've got work, you've got the content of work, and then you've got managing people, and sometimes technical things can be done, but people are not so easily, taken care of like technical problems. So what was the challenge about the people part?
The challenge was the stress. It was a very high stress environment.
Right.
There was a change of CEO when I came in, and so I played an integral part in that changeover, in sort of identifying issues and making it clear how the structure needed to work, and so that was a big part of the stress. And then
so that stress, I mean, okay, you're at the top of the tree in terms of the team, so you're going to be the lightning rod for the stress. Are you the person who's the buffer, keep the stress off the team members, or does the stress go all the way to the bottom?
I certainly tried, but the stress, I mean, there was a lot of stress.
Right.
So there was no way to be a perfect buffer.
Right. So the challenging part there, I guess, is you're managing people under stress, and you're under stress too. So what does that translate into? Is that short temper? Is that frustration? Is that people getting ill, mental health issues? How did that work out?
Luckily, there weren't any mental health issues, but it was people dealing with it each in his or her own way, right? And so I found some of the people got very, very focused and just sort of drew a very tight boundary on what they were able to do, and then others sort of didn't know quite what to do. And so what it meant is, to some degree, holding hands and letting them know that, it's going to work out. This is not the end. And so that's, I saw that as a big part of,
but then also people in your team.
Yep. At the time, it was very small. It was 3 people, 2 or 3 people.
Right? So it's like a family of 3 people, isn't it? It's like you're all in the trenches together.
Right.
We're going to survive together, or we all go down together. One of the two.
Exactly.
So how long were you doing that for?
It was for about a year and a half.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then what happens? When do you get your sort of next big leadership role?
So then, right after that, I went over to AIG.
AIG, totally different industry.
Totally different.
AIG, big American company. Probably been in Japan quite a long time by the time you arrived, I guess. Yeah. So when you get to AIG, how big's your team there?
Then it was small as well. It was 2 people.
Okay, so again, quite small.
Maybe 3, yeah.
So it must be quite a specialized group then.
Yes, yeah. It was basically a very technical database focused group that tried to manage across all of the AIG companies in both Japan and Korea.
So what was like going from, sort of coming out of SoftBank, NASDAQ, into AIG, different industry, you turn up, meet your new boss, never been in the insurance business ever. Okay, how do you convince people that I'm your boss, follow me?
It was through first understanding what they were doing, right, and understanding where they were aimed, but then at the same time understanding what the objective is, right? And in this case, it was an objective of providing data and data solutions to a very broad group of people based on who the customers are and communicating with those customers as well.
And how long did that continue with that small team? Did the team grow? Did you grow the team, or did you go somewhere else and have a bigger team?
The team both grew and changed.
Okay.
And incorporated basically.
Let me guess, restructures.
No.
Okay.
No. Just started to work with. There are a variety of different companies, and this was in the holding company.
Oh, okay.
And so the team sort of grew to work with more of the companies.
Because we've done training with AIG, and
there's a lot of
restructures going on there. So when you said that, I thought, I wonder if you're one of those restructures. So and you stayed there for how long?
5 years.
5 years. And so as the team grew, I'm guessing that you inherited a couple of people to start off with, and as the team grows and direction changes, you're starting to bring people in either from outside or from inside. You're recruiting them.
Right.
So there's a different loyalty, a different, I guess, touch with people that you're selecting, you're choosing, than people that you inherited. So did you find that was the case, that it was easier to, once you actually brought the people on yourself, to lead them, or made no difference?
It did make a difference, of course, but there's a lot of lateral transfer as well within AIG.
Okay,
and
right.
so the loyalties and those connections were fairly complicated.
Right.
Right. But did enjoy working with there's a huge different group of personalities there.
And how long were you at AIG?
So 5 years. Yeah.
5 years, and then so what happens after that?
After that, I joined. After that, I joined a company called Assurion.
Okay. Yes.
It became, I believe, the fastest growing company in Japan for 3 years running. It was also in the insurance industry.
Insurance industry, right? Yeah.
But they built insurance products just for cell phones.
For insurance
for cell phones.
Cell phones.
Right. So worked with, at the time, just with NTT Docomo.
So what's this? You lose your cell phone or something? Is
right.
that the
If you
idea?
break it or lose it
or drop it.
Yep.
Like I'm constantly dropping mine. I should have probably got the policy. You know? Right. Okay.
Right.
That's a very niche area, isn't it?
It's very niche, but.
But I guess the whole mobile phone thing just took off too. So I guess you're following that wave, aren't you?
It was explosive, and the growth of the company was in Japan was explosive.
So what was your role there at Assurion?
So I was the chief risk officer, and also the chief product officer.
Right. Oh, you.
So dual roles, yeah.
And sort of contradictory hats in a way, aren't they? Sort of less products is less risk, or.
Well, yeah, but in a way. Look, the product of an insurance company is risk.
Right.
So is risk management tools.
Right.
And so and it was a very data intensive
was it?
Program. It was before big data was called big data.
Okay.
But we had, I don't know, millions, probably 35 million subscribers.
Wow.
In a policy that people paid every month. With different phone types. This is the flip phone time.
Yeah, I have one of those. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we tracked each of 1,000 different kinds of phones, and could tell the risk characteristics of every single one of them.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the team there, how big is the team there that you're running?
That was about 15 people.
So it's getting a bigger team now.
Yeah.
So what's the dynamic like for you? You're going from a smaller number of people to a larger number of people. But 15 is still doable for one person. That's we start getting 25, 30, 40. It's the dynamic changes, but 15, one person, you can do it. What was the difference for you? What adjustments did you have to make to run a slightly bigger team than when you had a smaller team before?
The first thing is just figuring out who I can rely on for what, right? And so there were a couple of people who I could really rely on for technical advice, and others who I could really rely on for business and financial advice, and then others who would just get things done.
I mean, in any situation like that, the Pareto principle says that 80% of them are going to be producing 20% of the results, and 20% producing 80% of the results. So by definition, you're going to have a couple of stars, and then everyone else, I guess. Was it like that, or were they all fairly competent? So
I tried not to see it like that.
Okay, interesting.
I tried to identify people who really enjoyed and were really good at their area, and who would be willing to dig in and be an expert. And so there were a couple of stars, inevitably, and I relied on them very heavily, more than others. But tried to give each sort of chief of his area or her area something that sort of a set of responsibilities and a set of people who could really manage well.
And how long were you there?
That was 3 or 4 years.
Okay,
yeah, 4 years.
And after Assurion?
After Assurion, I went to PayPal.
PayPal, okay, right. And so what was the role at PayPal?
So is the country manager.
Country manager. This is your first. I'm the big boss. Okay, where's my corner office? I'll have a cup of coffee now, thank you. So all good.
It wasn't like that at all.
Yeah, I'm being facetious. Don't worry, I'm being facetious. So now you're running the whole show, and so this again, it's quite a big step up from 15 people to the whole company. And PayPal was how big at that time?
It was, I think, 35 or 40 something.
Was Elon Musk still involved with PayPal at that time, or had he moved on?
I think he had moved on.
Okay.
I didn't deal with him in any case.
Because I was looking for a few Elon stories there, but anyway.
Well, sorry.
Yeah,
You got a Masa story. That's pretty good.
That's pretty good. No, that was excellent.
Sorry.
That was excellent. Thank you. That's great. So what was that like? You turn up at PayPal. Okay, here I am. I'm now the country head, the boss. Again, what's your approach? Do you have like the sort of, the 30-day, 60-day, 90-day plan, or how do you start to build a trust with the people? How do you work that, integrating yourself into their operation, because it exists. You're coming in from outside.
That's right.
It already exists. They've been doing this for a while now.
That's right.
How did you approach that?
First, the regional boss was very clear on what he wanted.
Okay.
We were there to develop a new product, and so he made it. Frankly, it was a very easy transition at first, and so I understood his vision and was very clear on who was going to be responsible for executing that vision. What happened was that he left midstream.
I'm smiling now because the guy that hires you quits the company. It's always a dangerous turn of events, isn't it?
Yeah. And so he actually stayed with the company, moved to Europe, to Luxembourg. But the whole character of the organization changed rather suddenly. And as a part of that, the CEO took an interest in Japan.
Okay.
And said, okay, we've got to do something really interesting. So we made a deal with SoftBank for distribution.
Were you involved in that, given your connections with Masio-san?
I was.
Right.
I was. It was a difficult time because the match on the ground wasn't really there.
Right.
It was a deal that my boss and I, and primarily my boss at the time, objected to. And so we said, we don't think this deal is a good idea.
So the impetus for the deal is coming from
the CEO.
The CEO.
The CEO.
So your immediate boss, regional boss.
Regional boss.
And you were looking at going, CEO may have this wrong.
Right.
How do we tell him it's wrong?
Right.
It's always a difficult conversation, that one, isn't it?
It was very difficult. It was very difficult. And it didn't go well. It went well. I mean,
yeah.
It was interesting because he's a very strong leader and said, look, I understand it's on me.
Good. Make it happen. Anyway.
Make it happen, right. It's my decision.
Right. And how about for the team? Because, probably your regional head, yourself, and probably your team are probably thinking, probably not a great idea, but, or do they think, oh, it's going to be fine? I mean, because you're the one who's got to convince them, okay, gang, this is going to work. We're going to make it work. We're going to do this together. That's your job.
That was my job, and I knew both sides, right? So I knew Sansan. I knew the head of eBay or eBay PayPal at the time. And so so it's like, okay, we're going to do this, right? And so we absolutely did.
So the team got behind it.
Yep.
What was challenging about being the country head? Because again, it sounds like you've got quite a lot of, I'm going to use the word supervision. That may be the wrong word, but you've got your regional head and working quite tightly with you, as opposed to, okay, you take care of Japan, Jonathan, making sure we got the numbers and away you go. You've got some space there, as opposed to, okay, you're quite closely clustered there together. Maybe you don't have that much freedom. I don't know. How was that? Did you have a sense of freedom, or were you feeling like you're sort of bound, together?
So it's always freedom in certain dimensions,
right,
and sort of constraint in other dimensions, right?
Okay.
So there was a combination. I felt a lot of freedom working with my team. I felt very little freedom or none on the overall strategic role, right? But that's basically comes down to being a good soldier, right?
Yeah,
and just to following orders. And so that's really what I did and what the team did.
So how many years were you there, PayPal?
Just a year and a half.
Oh, okay. So a pretty short time. And
Yes,
then what happens
yes.
after that?
Yeah. From there, I went to sorry, to Asurion.
Oh, back to Asurion.
Oh, sorry.
Asurion, PayPal.
Sorry.
And then...
No, sorry.
It's okay.
To Credirax.
What was the name?
To Credirax, which is an
Credirax.
Israeli company.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah, it's not big. It's an Israeli company that's based in Europe, and is in the payment space.
Okay.
And
is this one of those Israeli companies where they're sort of in the army together and they're doing some highly technical skill set there, and they come out of the army and start a startup? Is it one of those classic Israeli success stories?
Not quite like that. But similar. But similar in that there were a bunch of ex-army people who were very, very smart and thought that they could do everything, and basically expanded very quickly, both into the United States and Japan. Did a good job originally expanding, but then found that the company was overextended.
Oh, okay, right.
And so first they looked at the progress and they said, well, the U.S. isn't making much progress. Let's focus more on Japan. And then they had more trouble in Europe, and then decided they had to close things down.
Oh, shut the company down.
Shut everything but their European operations.
Oh, okay. So that was how long were you there?
So I was there for 3 years.
That must have been pretty tough. You're sort of trying to bridgehead into the market. You're really building up the brand, the recognition. Getting clients, collecting people, I guess, into the company.
Yes.
And then we're closing the office. That's a brutal.
It was
brutal
very
experience,
tough.
Isn't it? Yeah.
At the same time, it gave me insight into the potential for that business, for the acquiring business, for the credit card payments handling business, and a belief that Japan absolutely needed what that company or others could provide.
And is the current company the next logical progression from that?
Yes.
Okay. And so were you able to bring people with you into the new company? Because, if I'm working for this Israeli company in Japan, I've taken a risk as an employee. I've got a great boss here. And then despite I've got a great boss, the headquarters decides we're canning everything except for Europe. Now I'm on the street. That's tough. It's tough on everybody.
Yes.
Did you migrate some of those people into a new company, or
there was a period in between?
Was there? All right.
So so no. So the answer is no. I didn't pull people over to the from here, but it's also a very different skill set. That was a raw startup kind of skill set that required certain types of people. So Adyen is a much more developed company. It knows who it is. It has very strong principles and a formula of how people work together and of the kinds of people that it needs.
This is Adyen we're talking about.
This
now.
is for Adyen,
right.
And so I wouldn't presume, certainly not at the time, to think that any of those people would be a good match. For this company.
So how many years had Adyen been in Japan?
They had been in Japan for 4 years.
Okay. Right. So they got some traction, and they've got clients, and they've got staff, and you come in as the country head. So how big was the team at that point?
The team was around, I forget exactly, around 12, 13 people.
Okay, so it's a relatively, manageable size as one person. And how big is it now in Japan?
Now we've got 33,
right?
I believe,
So
32, 33, yeah.
You've doubled it, right?
Yeah.
In a couple of years, which again is impressive. And so again, you come in, you've seen something, a glimmer of an idea in your previous company, and they decided to can it, so it didn't go forward. It's a slightly different business perhaps, but you've got that idea. So again, how did you approach coming into this company? Did you have a sort of 90-day strategy, or what was your approach to take over the operation?
Yeah, well, the first thing I did was learn about Adyen. Adyen is an incredibly successful, fast-growing company out of Europe that has expanded, in very profitably from very early on in the company, and that has its own very focused formula for how to work with people, how to deal with how people treat each other, the amount of communication that's required, and it's a very unique environment. And so it's a company with a strong culture, with a deep culture, and therefore my first goal was to learn about the culture.
So, it's a Dutch company, and Adyen is unusual. It's a Surinese name.
Yes.
And it means start again.
Right.
So, but my impression of Dutch business culture, and what people tell me, I've never worked for a Dutch company, is they're rather dry, and their business format and very business-like, not like in Japan, we'd say sort of wet culture. It's rather of a dry culture. So I'm interested that they've actually got this very strong team concept going here. It seems a little bit, not say counterintuitive, but it's just interesting that my normal impression when you say Dutch culture is a bit more dry, a bit more focused on the money and not so much worried about the sort of human dimension. Maybe I've got that totally wrong. All the Dutch people listening to this can write in and complain, but that's what I've been told anyway.
Well, Adyen certainly started in Holland, but the culture, at least today, and I don't think ever really, was entirely a Dutch culture.
Oh, okay, right.
Right. It was it's very much designed to work all over the world. And when you think about the kind of customers that Adyen serves, which are very large multinationals who are selling all kinds of goods all over the world, what's important is to be able to communicate very clearly across within the company, across boundaries, very easily and directly. And so parts of Dutch culture come through in the directness.
Okay.
Right. But also, being it's very friendly, and it's very team oriented, and I wouldn't describe it as dry.
Okay.
I think that it's a very just very embracing, but self-aware culture at the same time.
That's going to be a pretty good fit for Japan, from what you've described to me. I mean, that sounds like culturally quite a good nexus there with how Japanese culture and business works. And so, if you think back through your career, you've had many iterations here and lots of exciting stuff going on. When you think about getting teams engaged, what things have you found over the years that work well to get a team engaged?
I think the first thing is listening, particularly in Japan. Japanese tend to listen very well and are taught to listen from a very early age and taught to observe what other people are doing. I think it's very easy as a foreigner to come in and be arrogant and try to tell people how it should be.
Let me just fix Japan.
Exactly. But it's exactly what it is. It's arrogant, and it's. So I think the first thing is to learn, is to listen, and to figure out which way the wind is blowing. If you strategically and in terms of the overall trend in the industry and the company, and then also listen to what people are saying and what they believe, who they think is is full of BS, who's actually committed, and that can take some time to figure out as well.
And so, in terms of engagement, for example, once upon a time, there's a lot of drinking in the business culture here as a means of engaging people. You'll go out drinking. I mean, Japanese companies will go on holiday together. It used to be like that. I don't think it's happening too much anymore. Younger generation, forget that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to go drinking with my boss either. So cultural differences there. But did you find things like that, town halls, have the Adyen soccer team or something like that, or drinking or parties, or, have lunches with people or small group lunches? I mean, there's many, many different angles on that type of thing to get engagement. Which particular things did you find that work well?
So again, I really sort of take the vision from the way that the company does things, which is that every year the company brings everybody all over the world, which is some 3,000 people, into Amsterdam for
The whole
whole company.
Every single person.
Yes.
They shut the business down. And
The
everyone
business
comes to
keeps
Amsterdam.
running.
Somehow it's running anyway.
It keeps running, and it's
Wow.
an amazing thing.
Wow. How long are they in Amsterdam for?
And so it's for a week.
Wow.
And
That's
some people
impressive.
stay 2 weeks.
Wow.
It's more than impressive.
That must be incredible. I mean, I've never heard of a company that really takes the teamwork
Yep.
so seriously, put that much money and time behind getting the glue, and particularly global glue, together and weld people together from all around the world. That's amazing. So your first trip to Amsterdam on that must have been like a real eye-opener, I imagine, like, wow.
It was incredible.
Yeah.
And it was immediately post-COVID.
Now, I'm going to ask the question here. Some people listening to this might be saying, oh, they sound like a cult. You know, because often people take the negative view of something like that, and there must be a cult, or, you know, it's a bit strange, or why would you do that? But how did you think about it?
I think it's I approach it as somebody who just watching the event, at least my first time, I'm like, this is amazing. What's going on here?
You really
And
am.
just seeing it.
I'd love to be a fly on the wall. Maybe I can be your kaban mochi or bag carrier the next time I go to Amsterdam. I'd love to see that. Fantastic. And I guess the impact on the people, I mean, if you think about every single person in this office is going to Amsterdam to attend this event, man, the esprit de corps, the motivation, the commitment, the loyalty, this just must be enormous.
Exactly.
Lift every year.
Exactly.
Incredible. Wow.
Exactly.
Your job's easy.
Exactly, right.
You don't
There's
have to do anything.
Nothing left to do.
Nothing left to do. It's all done. I mean, the whole
Right.
company structure's got it covered. That's incredible. Yeah, I'm impressed. I'm super impressed.
It's an incredible investment.
It is a big investment, isn't it? It's amazing. And what are the dimensions of having people engaged? And that would definitely engage people, I'm sure. You get people engaged, then they start to think about the business, you know. They start to think from their own part of the business, you know. How can we build a better mousetrap here, you know? Because if they're not engaged, they just don't care. I turn up, I get paid, but this must be stimulating for people to come up with ideas.
It is. But I'll tell you where it starts. It starts with one-on-one conversations.
Does it?
And so there's a company culture of having coffee chats.
Is there?
So the first thing that a new employee does is have coffee chats with 30 or 40 people
Wow.
all over the world.
They're totally wired for the next 24 hours, getting that coffee down there. Yeah.
You can have
But
tea here.
that's that personalization, that's human connection, isn't it?
Exactly. And it creates the connections to different departments, different parts of the world, so that we are really good at connecting with people in different parts of the organization, and connecting a customer's need in one area with their need in the other area. And we find that in a lot of cases, in most cases, we communicate and understand the connection between a customer's business in Paris and Tokyo better than that customer does.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. So, you know, that's coffee chats I imagine, particularly for Japanese staff, that would be so important because, Japanese really want to have that personal connection with people so they feel comfortable to call on them or be called upon and to reach out and to have that sense of security. So I think that's another, apart from your annual convention, is a genius idea. That's a really smart idea. I think for a Japanese team, that works extremely well. And in terms of ideas, now often someone in your position, you're extremely experienced, you've operated the highest levels in different big organizations. You're often an idea generating machine, as the CEO. You've got ideas popping out of your mind. But often the problem is how to get the ideas out of the people, how to get the ideas to bottom up, to come up to you. So you're not the one being the only source of ideas. What things have you found work well to get the ideas to come out of the team?
First, it's not to say my ideas.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Particularly in Japan, but it's to ask questions, right? And so you can call it Socratic, but
which we're a big believer in, by the way, as a training company. That's one of
is that right? Okay.
It's one of our fundamental teaching methodologies, the Socratic method of asking questions for people to self-discover, as opposed to trying to cram it down their throat from the external, push.
And I think that's right, generally because you're not going to be there all the time, right? They're going to have to figure it out by themselves anyway, right? And so it means a certain amount of listening and hearing silly things sometimes, and not objecting and say, you're wrong, right? But I think that's a big part of growing an organization, is growing the people and giving them a chance to say what they think, to make mistakes, to try things.
Well, on that point, you and I both know that this is a no defect, no mistake culture, and things like minimum viable product in this country don't work because it's got to be perfect by the time the consumer gets hold of it or the buyer. So having mistakes, you've got a culture that says no mistakes. The best way to not make a mistake is to do nothing, particularly anything new. And, they get punished in Japanese corporations for making mistakes, and they all know that. They know it's a career depressant. So how do you get people to have the courage to try things, particularly new things, experiment, make mistakes? How do you get that to come out?
So it starts with hiring, because if you hire somebody who's been in a traditional Japanese company for a long time, the likelihood is that it's going to be very hard to change that mindset. That said, there are people who've been in traditional Japanese corporations for a long period of time, who are always sort of a little at odds.
The renegades.
Right? Yeah. And I think finding and nurturing those people is a tremendous asset. So that's one way. Another way is finding people who are young enough in their careers that they're willing to, either they don't know better or they're willing to experiment and try different things. Right? And so I think it comes down to partly to personality and partly to the types of experiences that somebody has had.
The other thing is the handling of the mistake. For example, the irony, right? Yes, go forth, try new things, experiment. They do that. They make a mistake. Whack! Right. Clip across the ear. You made a mistake. This is where you just kill innovation right there. So as leaders, when mistakes generally come up, how we react to them, how we talk to people, how we handle them makes all the difference. So how do you handle it?
So the first thing is to be calm and not to freak out or to panic. And sometimes that's difficult.
And there's a $2 mistake, and then there's a $20 million mistake, isn't there? So being calm on a $2 mistake's one thing.
That's right. Then you can say, so what happened here? But then even on a really big mistake, there's nothing you're going to do about it right then.
Right.
That's going to fundamentally change the mistake.
No.
Right. What you can do right then is either discourage the hell out of a subordinate and make the team look down on that person, or give the team a chance to reflect on what went wrong, why it went wrong, and how we're going to fix it.
I guess in Japan too, I mean, one of the other sort of counterpoints here is that they love having shared responsibility. They love having collegiate decision making, and that sort of spreads the risk, doesn't it? We're all responsible, so no individual is responsible, is sort of part of the culture here too, isn't it? So I guess it's rare that you get a single person making a single decision in Japanese companies, I guess, and it's a joint decision. It's all the interested parties having a say in the final decision. So I guess that sort of harmonizes things a little bit. In terms of trust, because this again comes back to letting people try things, there's a big degree of trust there. And I mean, every culture deals on trust. I get that. But I just always feel that there's such an emotional component about business in Japan that's not necessarily there in other countries. And this trust component is part of it. Like, when you're hiring people and you go through the resumes and you ask them, you change jobs here. Oh, well, my previous boss called me. That's an extremely emotional decision. That's not a logical decision. And then they call them, often happens, they call them to the new Geishke, the new foreign multinational, like your previous example, which crashes, and then they close it down in Japan, and they're on the street, and then their resume is pitted with all these changes, But that idea that this emotional bond and trust and all that stuff's really sort of, you wouldn't think Japan's like that, but I find it's very emotional. So what do you think about building trust with people? What have you found works well to build trust?
First, honesty, time.
We'll just talk about time, because most leaders are massively time poor, massively time poor. And it's one thing to talk about coaching people, mentoring people, developing people. There's a time requirement to that. And if you're just, belting crocodiles with an oar or fighting fires all day long, you don't have any time for any of that. So the time factor is never there to build that level of trust. So how does that work? What have you found to get around that?
Well, let's see. When I say time, I don't mean necessarily one-on-one time, extended one-on-one time.
Okay.
I mean, over a period of time, seeing how an individual responds to different kinds of situations. Right. Because there are always a variety of situations, and everybody's always watching. Right. And so the question is, over time, does this person behave in a way that makes sense to me as an employee, as a friend, as a boss, whatever? And is this something that I have enough confidence that this person will continue doing and continue acting in this way? And if I have confidence in that, that's, I believe, the foundation of trust. And
what about the other direction? They're having trust in you. I mean, you talked about being honest. Oh, absolutely. But what are the things you've found to actually help them to build trust in you?
So again, I think it's that same honesty, seeing you handle the same kind of situation the same way.
Okay, so consistency
of
and evenness of approach. So you're not having teacher's pet over here who screwed up, but that's okay, and someone else screwed up over there, like that's not okay. So having that consistent, even-handed approach.
So I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, right.
I think it's having a set of principles.
Okay.
That people can understand.
Like what? What sort of principles?
Well, I mean, I think that people at Adyen have trust in the company because the company has this set of principles of the formula, and it's out there every day, and people are talking about it all the time. Now,
are these customer service principles? Are these corporate principles? What are these? Are these principles? If I wander around this office, am I going to find them in a big glass case, on a wall, or how does it work?
There are just a handful of principles, but it's things like speak directly, but don't be rude.
Right.
Right. So don't, so that's the very Amsterdam sort of Dutch part of it. Another is just, very basic, like, we're fair. We treat people honestly, right, and fairly, right. Another one is pick up the phone. Don't just write an email, right.
I love that one.
It's a way of, it's being direct, and so it gets to the core of the culture of a large company that needs to interconnect very frequently with different people across time zones.
I'm going to pick up on that phone thing because I've heard this comment from a lot of people that the younger generation are scared of the phone. They prefer email, and they don't want to talk to people, and they won't answer the phone. It's I don't know what your experience has been with this, but I often think about that this next generation has got quite a bit of a different bent on these things. So I wonder how the sort of corporate principles are fitting in with this sort of generational change.
I also think it's fascinating, a fascinating change. I think what's happened to the communication space is that it's become incredibly diverse, right? So there are lots of different ways of communicating. You can communicate in a time delayed way. You can do it synchronously. You can do it one to many. So that variety, I think people are still working out.
Right.
I don't think they've figured it out yet. The telephone is special because it's one-to-one, and you not only see the text, but you hear the intonation and the personal feeling behind it. I think as a society, we're working these things out. I think that again, specifically for Adyen, it's an amazing sort of discovery of the value of certain kinds of modes of communication, given the scope and size of the company that it is, and the kind of customers that they serve.
Let's talk a little bit about culture. You always have a global culture, and then you have a country culture, the native culture, like the native culture of Japan. Then you're the leader. And then you want to have a type of culture within your organization. So you've got sort of multi-layers of culture. And of course, they have to align. You can't suddenly say, well, I'm going to have the Epstein culture in Japan, which is at odds with the corporate culture. You won't be around very long if that's the case. So you're always fitting in under these multiple umbrellas. But in terms of creating a culture, what things have you found works well to do that?
A couple of different things. First, celebrations.
Okay.
Right? So celebrating individuals' achievements, and doing that on a very regular basis. I think that.
And how would that look? What would that be? Big bottle of champagne, or
dinner, or not so extravagant. Just everybody saying, hey, last week you did a good job doing this.
And this is publicly in front of
in front of the whole team.
Because that's interesting too. Because sometimes in Japan, Japanese are not comfortable with that. When you single them out for recognition. In a lot of cases, Japanese are a bit worried about, other people get jealous, and I don't want to be singled out. I want to be in the group, So that's always a bit tricky. Some people, no, they love it. Yeah, you recognize me. But others are like, ooh. So I guess, what you're thinking about that, who you choose to give that public recognition to, or you just give it to everybody.
Give it. And it's not just me giving it.
Right, okay.
Right. So I encourage, I try not to do that myself. I try to encourage the entire team to do that.
Ah, okay.
Right.
Okay.
So every week, one of the first things that we do is go around and say what's gone well, and gratitude towards whatever member of the team. And every week, there are different interesting things that I didn't know about that people mention, and some of them are strictly business related, and some of them are interpersonal related, or how somebody helps somebody with a personal issue, or it's gratitude.
Is that a formalized thing? For example, many Japanese companies have what they call a chore, which is the morning meeting where you sort of get everybody, now we call it a scrum or a huddle. We've got all these cool names for the same thing. I've been calling it chore in Japan probably for 1,000 years, But that sort of idea of you come together collectively, and then you talk about in your sections perhaps, or whole of floor or of the workers there. Is it done that way, or is it more ad hoc?
Well, we've got a very sophisticated group that we call the Monday morning meeting.
Ah, there you go. That's a very technical term.
So
highly technical term. Yeah.
Exactly. No, it's just a regular meeting that we have, and so we expect the same thing. And everybody knows, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to talk about these things, and if there's an issue, we're going to bring it up there. And yeah.
And is there a Tuesday and Wednesday, or is it
no?
Mondays?
It's once
just
a week.
Mondays? Okay, right.
Yeah.
So, in terms of, if you were thinking about giving some advice to someone, they say, "Hey, Jonathan, I've been picked for this big job in Japan. I'm going to be flying in there soon, and family's coming after me, and I don't know anything about Japan. I don't speak Japanese. How can I be effective as a leader?" What would be some advice you'd give them?
So, this is advice that I tend to give people who I work closely with, who are in leadership positions, but particularly not everybody, but some people, which is spend a day and don't talk. Don't talk, at least unless you're directly asked a question, and just listen. Because the things that you learn about other people and about yourself is invaluable, and it's particularly important for Westerners who are
Why is that?
who are always talking about themselves, right? And so I think that's an incredibly difficult thing to do, and something that it can be very difficult, right? But it forces yourself to listen, and it also sensitizes the person to how often it's what he's saying is just some form of self-aggrandizement.
Right. So you think it's sort of structural executive leadership, but it's actually what a genius I am and my experience and what I've found and what I've know and my insights and here's my idea type of thing. Okay, I got it. What else?
The other is, again, I mean, it's similar, but it's sort of watching how people treat each other, and watching within an organization or on the sidewalk, right? How people interact, right? And what the level of expectation is. And that varies, dramatically by company. And in some companies, people are, very comfortable yelling at each other. And in
Must
others,
be a fun place to work. Not.
It's just, it's a different culture, right?
Trading floors and that's a finance business. I've been in that business. Yeah, I know.
And so there are different cultures. So just observe the environment, decide if it fits you, right? And you're able to move comfortably in that space, and then learn to interact within that.
Should they learn Japanese?
It depends how old they are.
Thank you.
Japanese is a huge hurdle.
For most CEOs, male or female, being sent to Japan, they're not going to be kids, right? They're going to be, 50s, I guess, maybe older than that, right? So what do you think? Our brains are not malleable enough to absorb this massively difficult language, or what do you think?
You're going to spend, if at a certain age, you're going to spend more time learning the language than you will, listening and trying to tune your ear to the language than to tuning actually what's going on in the company. Read
the body language, maybe it'd be a good piece of advice. Yeah.
Right. So, from a personal perspective, I think learning language it's very rich. It's enriching, right? Because you get a sense of the culture from the language and of how people work. Like, for example, sentences end in the verb and in negation or assertion or negation, right? So only know at the end of the sentence what they think of the content of the sentence. That alone tells you a lot about Japanese culture and the way people think. It's incredibly valuable.
You don't know whether it's present tense, past tense, future tense, negative or positive until you get to the end of the sentence. So you've got to wait for the whole thing, which I think is brilliant in terms of absorbing the communication as opposed to the verbs in the middle, your brain is off to the races with what you think they're going to say and what you're going to counterpoint to what they're going to say, and you've stopped listening. After the verb, you've tuned them out. At least in Japanese, you've got to listen, right? Yeah, nice.
So some knowledge, I think, is a good idea, but I wouldn't necessarily tell somebody to wait until they speak fluently to start the job.
What would be your definition of leadership? How would you define it?
I define it as the ability to see the important thing, to see what needs to be done, and then the ability to communicate to the appropriate set of people in a way that convinces them how to get that thing done.
I didn't bring it up before, but I'm not going to miss this opportunity. It was like the end of the interview. So the people who get this far get the bonus points, right? But you worked with Masayoshi-san, and you mentioned before he's very charismatic. I've never met the man, so I've only seen him on TV, right? What makes him charismatic?
It's passion. He's a little guy. He knows he's a little guy. He knows he's not Japanese. He knows that people think he's weird. But when he's into something, when he likes an idea, he'll like jump up and down.
Just excited about it. Yeah.
And isn't afraid to look ridiculous but just very quickly knows where he wants to go, where the world is going to go first, right? Where he's got to move in order to be in line with where the world's going to be, and then just pulling people into that vision. It's an incredible.
So he sounds like he's a massive enthusiast.
Yeah,
like some people have hobbies, or his hobby is probably work, and he's just bringing that passion, enthusiasm to that, which is a magnetic field that draws you into. And I guess that's why I asked you before about his salesmanship. To bring people with him, because it's a tremendous organization he's built from nothing. It's incredible. Okay.
It's really impressive.
And did you take anything away from that yourself? I mean, when you touch people like that who are, quite specific and quite, at a very high level, and you're with him all the time, you're traveling with him, you're in the meetings with him, you're like living in his pocket, type of thing. Were you able to take things from that and put that into yourself as a leader?
I hope so. I definitely think so in some dimensions and to some degree. But we're very different people.
Yeah, personalities, haven't we? Yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm very grateful for that exposure and for meeting the incredible set of people who I did, Li Ka-shing and Jerry Yang, Tim Kugel, Meg. I mean, basically the whole internet.
Oh, pantheon of the gods of business, exactly, there, right?
Yeah, Jack Ma.
Really.
So I'm very, very grateful for that. And I tried to, whenever I met those people as well, I tried to see, what made them tick and what. But I don't know.
It's interesting. You meet people who've got charisma, and it radiates from them, doesn't it? It's not like you've got to get close to them and have a long conversation. Like they just walk in the room and you feel the energy, or you feel something. It's like, okay, the atmosphere's changed in this room just by their sheer presence. I always found that. I haven't met very many people like that, but I have met people like that. I always thought about that. Could I be like that?
Yeah.
Hasn't happened yet, but I'm working on it.
One who I met? I met Hank Paulson.
Right. Yeah.
He's a big guy.
He's tall, isn't he?
Yeah, he's a big guy, and his size just commands But then I also met Hank Greenberg,
Right.
the head of AIG.
Yeah.
He's a teeny little guy.
Yeah.
Looks, like a smaller version of my grandfather.
Right.
Right? And just like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think it's situational. I think it's about, I think it's related to passion around a specific issue. I've never, I don't know. So I don't have a
I take us
solution
on a detour here, but I just wanted to ask because,
Yeah.
you've worked with some incredible people, so it's always good to hear that. And John, this has been an outstanding interview. Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for sharing.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for pulling me over.
Yeah, well, join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.